Good morning and welcome back to Storytime Classics Live, produced by Southwest Shakespeare Company. I am your host, Bo Heckman, and somebody pick me up and get me out from in front of this crazy haunted house. I don't know, I've been here every time introducing Rebecca. Today we are continuing with Rebecca and our special guest reader, Amy Bjorklund. Amy, how are you?
I'm well. Well, you are going to be stuck in front of that backdrop for a while longer. We have a lot of Rebecca to enjoy.
Yes. What's happening in Rebecca right now? Where are we in the story?
Well, we just had a nice little chat with Frank Crawley, the house manager guy, and she's getting a little bit more information about Rebecca. So it looks like she doesn't do much with that information yet, but I think we're starting to hear more and more about this first Mrs. De Winter and see why everyone's so enamored with her, because apparently she was very beautiful.
Oh, yes. We have a comment from Stanley this morning. Stanley, I saw you in the class this morning. We were both in another Zoom class this morning, and I hope to go back to it here. Yes, it was a Lambda thing. It was very entertaining. And Stanley says, good morning, Amy, and how are you today? In your opinion, what is the best motion picture of Rebecca? Thanks, Amy. And that is from Stanley. And we have another one coming in that I'll ask you right after that. First, Stanley's question.
Well, I haven't seen the newest one. So I teach the 1940s one in my cinema class. So I love that one. But I haven't watched the new one with Lily James because I want to read this first and then watch the new one. So I would say still the Hitchcockian 39, 41. That would be my favorite. Because I haven't seen the new one, but I have a feeling they'll both be my favorite after that. The cast of the new one looks amazing. Yeah. Oh, it's so good.
Yeah, it'll be hard pressed to improve upon that one, but I look forward to seeing that one, the next one as well.
Definitely.
We have a comment from Catherine James saying, good morning, Bo and Amy and Stanley. I am excited for another ripping installment of Rebecca.
Me too. I'm telling you, it's so hard to not read ahead. I don't, which is why I have to remind myself where we are. But yes, I agree. I'm very excited to see what happens.
There's Amy at night.
Just put it down. She just sits here. Rebecca sits here like this going, open and read me. Open and read. And I'm like, no, Rebecca, I'll see you on Tuesday.
It's like that book in Harry Potter with the,
the monsters. Yes.
Yes, there you go. Without further ado, I will turn it over to you and let you take us away into another ripping installment of Rebecca.
Yes.
I like that.
Fantastic. Thanks, Bo.
Thank you,
All right. So this is the edition I'm reading from, and we are on chapter 12. So like I said, we just had a nice conversation with Mr. Crawley. And now we're just skipping right ahead. Here we go. I did not see much of Mrs. Danvers. She kept very much to herself. She still rang the house telephone in the morning room every day and submitted the menu to me as a matter of form, but that was the limit of our intercourse. She had engaged a maid for me, Clarice, the daughter of somebody on the estate, a nice, quiet, well-mannered girl who, thank heaven, had never been in service before and had no alarming standards. I think she was the only person in the house who stood in awe of me. To her, I was the mistress. I was Mrs. De Winter. The possible gossip of the others could not affect her. She had been away for some time, brought up by an aunt 15 miles away. In a sense, she was as nude and mannerly as I was. I felt at ease with her. I did not mind saying, "Oh, Clarice, would you mend my stocking?" The housemaid Alice had always been so superior. I used to sneak my chemise and nightgown out of my drawer and mend them myself rather than ask her to do them. I had seen her once with one of my chemises over her arm, examining the plain material with its small edging of lace. I shall never forget her expression. She looked almost shocked, as though her own personal pride had received a blow. I had never thought about my underclothes before. As long as they were clean and neat, I had not thought the material, or the existence of lace, mattered. Brides one read about had trousseaux, dozens of sets at a time, and I had never bothered. Alice's fates taught me a lesson. I wrote quickly to a shop in London and asked for a catalogue of underlinen. By the time I had made my choice, Alice was looking after me no longer, and Clarice was installed instead. It seemed such a waste buying new underclothes for Clarice that I put the catalogue away in a drawer and never wrote to the shop at all. I often wondered whether Alice told the others, and if my underclothes became a topic of conversation in the servants' hall, something rather dreadful to be discussed on low tones when the men were nowhere about. She was too superior for it to be made a joking question. Phrases like chemise to you would never be brandied between her and Frith, for instance. No, my underclothes were more serious than that, more like a divorce case never heard in camera. At any rate, I was glad when Alice surrendered me to Clarice. Clarice would never know real lace from false. It was considerate of Mrs. Danvers to have engaged her. She must have thought we would fit company, one for the other. Now that I knew the reason for Mrs. Danvers's dislike and resentment, it made things a little easier. I knew it was just not me personally she hated, but what I represented. She would have felt the same towards anyone who had taken Rebecca's place. At least that's what I understand from Beatrice the day she came to lunch. "Did you not know?" she had said. "She simply adored Rebecca." The words had shocked me at the time. Somehow I had not expected them, but when I thought it over, I began to lose my first fear of Mrs. Danvers. I began to be sorry for her. I could imagine what she must feel. It must hurt her every time she had to call me Mrs. De Winter. Every morning when she took up the house telephone and spoke to me, and I answered, "Yes, Miss Danvers," she must be thinking of another voice. When she passed through the rooms and saw traces of me about the place, a beret on a window seat, a bag of knitting on a chair, she must think of another one who had done these things before. Even as I did, I, who had never known Rebecca. Mrs. Danvers knew how she walked and how she spoke. Mrs. Danvers knew the color of her eyes, her smile, the texture of her hair. I knew none of these things, had never even asked about them, but sometimes I felt Rebecca was so real to me as she was to Mrs. Danvers. Frank had told me to forget the past, and I wanted to forget it. But Frank did not have to sit in the morning room as I did, every day, and touch the pen she had held between her fingers. He did not have to rest his hands on the blotter and stare in front of him at her writing on the pigeonholes. He did not have to look at the candlesticks on the mantelpiece, the clock, the vase in which the flowers stood, the pictures on the walls, and remember every day that they belonged to her. She had chosen them. They were not mine at all. Frank did not have to sit in her place in the dining room, hold the knife and fork that she had held, drink from her glass. He did not throw a coat over his shoulders which had been hers, nor find her handkerchief in the pocket. He did not notice every day, as I did, the blind gaze of the old dog in its basket in the library, who lifted its head when it heard my footsteps, the footstep of a woman, and sniffed the air, drooped its head again because I was not the one it sought. Little things, meaningless and stupid in themselves, but they were there for me to see, for me to hear, for me to feel. Dear God, I did not want to think about Rebecca. I wanted her to be happy, to make Maxim happy, and I wanted us to be together. There was no other wish in my heart but that. I could not help it if she came to me in thoughts, in dreams. I could not help it if I felt like a guest in Mannerley, my home, walking where she had trodden, resting where she had lain. I was like a guest, biding my time, waiting for the return of the hostess. Little sentences, little reproofs, reminding me every hour, every day. "Frith," I said, coming into the library on a summer morning, my arms full of lilac. "Frick, where can I find a tall vase for these? They are all too small in the flower room." "The white alabaster vase in the dining room was always used for the lilac, madam." "Oh, wouldn't it be spoiled? It might get broken." "Miss De Winters always used the alabaster vase, madam." "Oh, I see." Then the alabaster vase was brought for me, already filled with water, and as I put the sweet lilac in the vase and arranged the sprigs one by one, the mauve scent filling the air, mingled with the smell of a new-mown lawn outside coming in from the open window, I thought, Rebecca did this. She took the lilac, as I am doing, and put the sprigs in one by one in the white vase. I'm not the first one to do it. This is Rebecca's vase. This is Rebecca's lilac. She must have wandered out into the garden as I did, on that floppy garden hat I had seen once in the back of a cupboard in the flower room, hidden under some old cushions, and crossed the lawn to the lilac bushes, whistling, perhaps, humming a tune, calling to the dogs to follow her, carrying in her hands the scissors that I carried now. "Frith, would you move that bookstand from the stand on the window, and I'll put the lilac there?" "Mrs. De Winter always had the alabaster vase on the table behind the sofa, madam." "Oh, well," I hesitated, the vase in my hands, Frith's face impassive. He would obey me, of course, if I said I preferred to put the vase on the smaller table by the window. He would move the bookstand at once. "All right," I said. "Perhaps it would look better on the larger table." And the alabaster vase stood, as it had always done, on the table behind the sofa. Beatrice remembered her promise of a wedding present. A large parcel arrived one morning, almost too large for Robert to carry. I was sitting in the morning room, having just read the menu for the day. I have always had such a childish love of parcels. I snipped the string excitedly and tore off the dark brown paper. It looked like books, and I was right. It was books. 4 big volumes, a history of painting, and a sheet of notepaper in the first volume saying, "I hope this is the sort of thing you like," and signed, "Love from Beatrice." I could see her going into the shop on Wingmore Street and buying them, looking about her in her abrupt, rather masculine way. "I want a set of books for someone who is keen on art," she would say, and the attendant would answer, "Yes, madam. Would you come this way?" She would finger the volumes a little suspiciously. "Yes, that's about the price. It's for a wedding present. I want them to look good. Are these all about art?" "Yes, this is the standard work on the subject," the assistant would say, and then Beatrice must have written her note and paid her check and given the address, Mrs. De Winter, Manderley. It was nice of Beatrice. There was something rather sincere and pathetic about her going off to shop in London and buying me these books because she knew I was fond of painting. She imagined me, I expect, sitting down on a wet day and looking solemnly at the illustrations and perhaps getting a sheet of drawing paper and a paint box and copying one of the pictures. Dear Beatrice. I had a sudden, stupid desire to cry. I gathered up the heavy volumes and looked around the morning room for somewhere to put them. They were out of place in that fragile, delicate room. Never mind, it was my room now, after all. I arranged them on a row on the top of the desk. They swayed dangerously, leaning against one another. I stood back a bit to watch the effect. Perhaps I moved too quickly and it disturbed them. At any rate, the foremost one fell and the others slid after it. They upset the little china Cupid who had hitherto stood alone on the desk except for the candlesticks. He fell to the ground, hitting the waste paper basket as he did, and broke into fragments. I glanced hurriedly at the door like a guilty child. I knelt on the floor and swept up the pieces into my hand. I found an envelope to put them in, and I hid the envelope in the back of one of the drawers in my desk. Then I took the books off to the library and found room for them on the shelves. Maxim laughed when I showed them with pride. "Dear old Bee," he said. "You must have had a success with her. She never opens a book if she can help it." "Did she say anything about, what she thought of me?" I asked. "The day she came to lunch? No, I don't think so." "I thought she might have written or something." "Beatrice and I don't correspond unless there's a major event in the family. Writing letters is a waste of time," said Maxim. I supposed I was not a major event. Yet if I had been Beatrice and had a brother, and the brother married, surely one would have said something, expressed an opinion, written 2 words. Unless, of course, one had taken a dislike to the wife or thought her unsuitable. Then, of course, it would be different. Still, Beatrice had taken the trouble to go to London and to buy the book for me. She would not have done that if she disliked me. It was the following day, I remember, when Frith, who had brought the coffee after lunch into the library, waited a moment, hovering behind Maxim, and said, "Could I speak with you, sir?" Maxim glanced up from his paper. "Yes, Frith, what is it?" he said, rather surprised. Frith wore a stiff, solemn expression, his lips pursed. I thought at once his wife had died. "It's about Robert, sir. There's been a slight unpleasantness between him and Mrs. Danvers. Robert is very upset." "Oh, Lord," said Maxim, making a face at me. I bent down to fondle Jasper, my unfailing habit in moments of embarrassment. "Yes, sir. It appears Mrs. Danvers has accused Robert of secreting a valuable ornament from the morning room. It is Robert's business to bring in the fresh flowers to the morning room and place the vases. Mrs. Danvers went in this morning after the flowers had been done and noticed one of the ornaments was missing. It was there yesterday, she said. She accused Robert of either taking the ornament or breaking it and concealing the breakage. Robert denied both accusations most emphatically and came to me nearly in tears, sir. You may have noticed he was not himself at lunch. I wondered why he had handed me the cutlass without giving me a plate. I did not know Robert was so sensitive. Well, I suppose someone did it, one of the maids. No, sir. Mrs. Danvers went into the room before the girl had done the room. Nobody had been there since Madame yesterday, and Robert first thing with the flowers. It makes it very unpleasant for Robert and myself, sir. Yes, of course it does. Well, you'd better ask Mrs. Danvers to come here, and we'll get to the bottom of it. What ornament was it, anyway? The china Cupid, sir, that stands on the writing table. Oh, Lord. Well, that's one of our treasures, isn't it? It will have to be found. Get hold of Mrs. Danvers at once. Very good, sir. Frith left the room, and we were alone again. What a confounded nuisance, said Maxim. That Cupid is worth a hell of a lot. How I loathe servants' row, too. I wonder why they came to me about it. That's your job, sweetheart. I looked up from Jasper, my face red as fire. Darling, I said, I meant to tell you before, but I forgot. The fact is, I broke that cup when I was in the morning room yesterday. You broke it? Why the devil didn't you say so when Frith was here? I don't know. I didn't like to. I was afraid he would think me a fool. He'll think you much more a fool now. You'll have to explain to him and Mrs. Danvers. Oh, no, please, Maxim. You tell them. Let me go upstairs. Don't be a little idiot. Anyone would think you were afraid of them. I am afraid of them. At least not afraid, but... The door opened, and Frith ushered Mrs. Danvers into the room. I looked nervously at Maxim. He shrugged his shoulders, half amused, half angry. It's all a mistake, Mrs. Danvers. Apparently, Mrs. De Winter broke the Cupid herself and forgot to say something, said Maxim. They all looked at me. It was like being a child again. I was still aware of my guilty flush. I'm so sorry, I said, watching Mrs. Danvers. I never thought Robert would get into trouble. Is it possible to repair the ornament, madam? Said Mrs. Danvers. She did not seem to be surprised that I was the culprit. She looked at me with her white skull's face and her dark eyes. I felt she had known it was me all along and had accused Robert to see if I had the courage to confess. I'm afraid not, I said. It smashed into little pieces. What did you do with the pieces? Asked Maxim. Oh, it was like being a prisoner, giving evidence. How paltry and mean my actions sounded, even to myself. I put them all in an envelope, I said. Well, what did you do with the envelope? Said Maxim, lighting a cigarette, his tone a mixture of amusement and exasperation. I put it in the back of one of the drawers in the writing desk. Looks as though Mrs. De Winters thought you would put herself in prison, doesn't it, Mrs. Danvers? Said Maxim. Perhaps you would find the envelope and send the pieces up to London. They are too far gone to mend it. It can't be helped. All right, Frith, tell Robert to go dry his eyes. Mrs. Danvers lingered when Frith had gone. I will apologize to Robert, of course, she said, but the evidence pointed so strongly to him. It did not occur to me that Mrs. De Winter had broken an ornament herself. Perhaps if such a thing should happen again, Mrs. De Winter will tell me personally and I will have the matter attended to. It would save everybody a lot of unpleasantness. Naturally, said Maxim impatiently. I can't think why she didn't do so yesterday. I was just going to tell her when she came into the room. Perhaps Mrs. De Winter was not aware of the value of the ornament, said Mrs. Danvers, turning her eyes upon me. Yes, I said wretchedly. Yes, I was afraid it was valuable. That's why I swept it up so carefully. And hid it in the back of the drawer where no one could find them, said Maxim, with a laugh and a shrug of the shoulder. Is that the sort of thing that between a maid is supposed to come, Mrs. Danvers? The between maid at Manderley would never be allowed to touch the valuable things in the morning room, sir, said Mrs. Danvers. No, I can't see you letting her, said Maxim. It's very unfortunate, said Mrs. Danvers. I don't think we ever had any breakages in the morning room before. We were always so particular. I've done the dusting in there myself since last year. There's no one I would trust. When Mrs. De Winter was alive, we used to do the valuables together. Yes, well, it can't be helped, said Maxim. All right, Mrs. Danvers. She went out of the room, and I sat upon the window seat, looking out of the window. Maxim picked up his paper again, and neither of us spoke. I'm awfully sorry, darling, I said after a moment. It was very careless of me. I can't think how it happened. I was just arranging the books on the desk to see if they would stand, and the Cupid slipped. My sweet child, forget it. What does it matter? It does matter. I ought to have been more careful. Yes, Catherine, totally, right? And she feels it. She feels it. I do feel bad for her. Obviously, Mrs. Danvers is not her biggest fan. And Maxim's not very nice to her either. Okay. My sweet child. Forget it. What does it matter? It does matter. I ought to have been more careful. Mrs. Danvers must be furious with me. What the devil has she got to be furious about? It's not her bit of china. No, but she takes such pride in it all. It's so awful to think anything in there. And it's so awful to think nothing in there was ever broken before, and it had to be me. Better you than the luckless Robert. I wish it had been Robert. Mrs. Danvers will never forgive me. Damn Mrs. Danvers, said Maxim. She's not God Almighty, is she? I can't understand you. What do you mean by saying you're afraid of her? I did not mean afraid exactly. I don't see much of her. It's not that. I can't really explain. You do such extraordinary things, said Maxim. Fancy not getting a hold of her when you broke the thing and saying, Here, Mrs. Danvers, get this mended. She'd understand that. Instead of which you scraped up the remains of the envelope and hid them in the back of the drawer. Just like a between maid, as I said, and not the mistress of a house. I am like a between maid, I said slowly. I know I am in lots of ways. That's why I have so much in common with Clarice. We're in the same sort of footing, and that's why she likes me. I went and saw her mother the other day, and do you know what she said? I asked her if she thought Clarice was happy with us, and she said, Oh, yes, Mrs. De Winter, Clarice seems quite happy. She says it's not like being with a lady, Mum. It's like being with one of ourselves. Do you suppose she meant it as a compliment or not? God knows, said Maxim. Remembering Clarice's mother, I should take it as a direct insult. Her cottage is generally a shambles and smells of boiled cabbage. At one time, she had 9 children under 11, and she herself used to patter about in that patch of garden with no shoes and stocking around her head. We nearly gave her notice to quit. Why Clarice looks as neat and clean as she does, I can't imagine. She's been living with an aunt, I said, feeling rather subdued. I know my flannel skirt has dirty marks down the front, but I've never walked barefoot with a stocking around my head. I knew now why Clarice did not disdain my underclothes as Alice had done. Perhaps that's why I prefer calling on Clarice's mother to calling on people like the bishop's wife. The bishop's wife never said I was one of themselves. If you wear that grubby skirt when you call on her, I don't suppose she does, said Maxim. Of course I didn't call on her in my old skirt. I wore a frock, I said. And anyway, I don't think much of people who judge one another by their clothes. I hardly think the bishop's wife cares 2 pence about clothes, said Maxim. But she may have been rather surprised if you sat on the extreme edge of the chair and answered yes and no, like someone after a new job, which you did only the last time we turned to call together. I can't help being shy. I know you can't, sweetheart, but you don't make an effort to conquer it. I think that's very unfair, I said. I try every day, every time I go out or meet someone new. I'm always making efforts. You don't understand. It's all been very well for you. You're used to that sort of thing. I've not been brought up to it. Rot, said Maxim. It's not a question of bringing up, as you put it. It's a matter of application. You don't think I like calling on people, do you? It bores me stiff. But it has to be done in this part of the world. We're not talking about boredom, I said. There's nothing to be afraid of in being bored. If I was just bored, it would be different. I hate people looking me up and down as though I were a prize cow. Who looks you up and down? All the people down here. Everybody. What does it matter if they do? Gives them some sort of interest in life. Why must I be the one to supply the interest and have all the criticism? Because life at Manderley is the only thing that ever interests anybody down here. What a slap in the eye I must have been to them then. Maxim did not answer, and he went on reading his paper. What a slap in the eye I must have been to them, I repeated, and then, I suppose that's why you married me, I said. You knew I was dull and quiet and inexperienced, so there would never be any gossip about me. Maxim threw his paper on the ground and got up from his chair. What do you mean? He said. His face was dark and queer, and his voice was rough, not his voice at all. I don't know, I said, leaning back against the window. I don't mean anything. Why do you look like that? What do you know about gossip down here? He said. I don't, I said, scared by the way he was looking at me. I only said it because of something to say. Don't look at me like that, Maxim. What have I done? What is the matter? Who's been talking to you? He said slowly. No one at all. Why did you say what you did? I tell you, I don't know. It just came to my head. I was angry, cross. I do hate calling on those people. I can't help it. And you criticized me for being shy. I didn't mean it. Really, Maxim, I didn't. Please believe me. It was not a particularly attractive thing to say, was it? He said. No, I said no. It was rude and hateful. He stared at me moodily, his hands in his pockets, rocking backwards and forwards on his heel. I wonder if I did a very selfish thing in marrying you, he said. He spoke slowly, thoughtfully. I felt very cold, rather sick. How do you mean? I said. I'm not much of a companion to you, am I? He said. There are too many years between us. You ought to have waited and then married a boy of your own age. not someone like myself with half his life behind him. No, that's ridiculous, I said hurriedly. You know, age doesn't mean anything in marriage. Of course we are companions. Are we? I don't know, he said. I knelt upon the window seat and put my arms around his shoulders. Why do you say these things to me? I said. You know I love you more than anything in the world. There has never been anyone but you. You are my father and my brother and my son, all those things. It was my fault, he said, not listening. I rushed you into it. I never gave you a chance to think it over. I did not want to think it over, I said. There is no other choice. You don't understand, Maxim. When one loves a person, are you happy here? He said, looking away from me out the window. I wonder sometimes. You got thinner, lost your color. Of course I'm happy, I said. I love Manderley. I love the garden. I love everything. I don't mind calling on people. I just said that to be tiresome. I'll call on people every day if you want me to. I don't mind what I do. I've never for one moment regretted marrying you. Surely you must know that. He patted my cheek in his terribly absent way and bent down and kissed the top of my head. Poor lamb. You don't have much fun, do you? I'm afraid I am very difficult to live with. You're not difficult, I said eagerly. You are easy, very easy. Much easier than I thought you would be. I used to think it would be dreadful to be married, that one's husband would drink or use awful language or grumble if the toast was soft at breakfast and be rather unattractive together, or smell, possibly. You don't do any of those things. Good God, I hope not, said Maxim, and he smiled. I seized advantage of his smile. I smiled too and took his hands and kissed him. How absurd to say we are not companions. Why, look at how we sit here every morning, you with a book or paper and me with my knitting, just like cups of tea, just like old people married for years and years. Of course we're happy. You talk as though you thought we made a mistake. You don't mean it like that, do you, Maxim? You know our marriage is a success, a wonderful success. If you say so, then it's all right, he said. No, but you think it too, don't you, darling? It's not just me. We are happy, aren't we? Terribly happy. He did not answer. He went on staring at the window while I held his hands. My throat felt dry and tight, and my eyes were burning. Oh, God, I thought, this is like two people in a play. In a moment, the curtain will come down, we shall bow to the audience and go off into our dressing room. This can't be a real moment in the lives of Maxim and myself. I sat down on the window seat and let go of his hands. I heard myself speaking in a hard, cool voice. If you don't think we are happy, it would be much better if you would admit it. I don't want you to pretend anything. I'd much rather go away and not live with you anymore. It was not really happening, of course. It was a girl in the play talking, not me to Maxim. I pictured the type of girl who would play the part, tall and slim and rather nervy. Well, why don't you answer me? He took my face in his hands and looked at me, just as he had before when Frith had come into the room with tea, the day we went to the beach. How can I answer you? He said. I don't know the answer myself. If you say we are happy, let's leave it at that. It's something I know nothing about, and I take your word for it. We are happy. All right, then? That's agreed? He kissed me once again and then walked away out of the room. I went on sitting by the window, stiff and straight, my hands in my lap. You say all this because you're disappointed in me, I said. I'm gauche and awkward. I dress badly. I'm shy with people. I warned you in Monte Carlo how it would be. You think I'm not right for Manderley. Don't talk nonsense, he said. I've never said you dressed badly or were gauche. It's your imagination. As for being shy, you'll get over that. I've told you so before. We've argued in a circle, I said. We've come right back to where we started. This all began because I broke the Cupid in the morning room. If I hadn't broken the Cupid, none of this would have happened. We'd have drunk our coffee and gone out into the garden. Damn that infernal Cupid, said Maxim wearily. Do you really think I care whether it's 10,000 pieces or not? Was it very valuable? Heaven knows, I suppose so. I've really forgotten. Are all the things in the morning room valuable? Yes, I believe so. Why were all the most valuable things put into the morning room? I don't know. I suppose because they looked well there. Were they always there when your mother was alive? No, I don't think they were. They were scattered about the house, chairs in the lumber room, I believe. When was the morning room furnished as it is now? I was married. I suppose the Cupid was put there then? I suppose so. Was that found in a lumber room? No, I don't think it was. As a matter of fact, I believe it was a wedding present. Rebecca knew a lot about China. I did not look at him. I began to polish my nails. He had said the word quite naturally, quite calmly. It had been no effort to him. After a minute, I glanced at him swiftly. He was standing by the mantelpiece, his hands in his pockets. He was staring straight in front of him. He's thinking about Rebecca, I said to myself. He's thinking how strange it was that a wedding present to me would have been the cause of destroying a wedding present to Rebecca. He's thinking about the Cupid. He's remembering who gave it to Rebecca. He's going over in his mind how the parcel came and how pleased she was. Rebecca knew a lot about China. Perhaps he came into the room and she was kneeling on the floor, wrenching open the little crate in which the Cupid was packed. She must have glanced up at him and smiled. Look, Max, she would have said. Look at what we've been sent. And she then would have plunged her hand down into the shavings and brought out the Cupid, who stood on one foot, his bow in his hand. We'll have it in the morning room, she must have said, and he must have knelt down beside her, and they must have looked at the Cupid together. I went on polishing my nails. They were scrubby, like a schoolboy's nails. The cuticles grew up over the half moon. The thumb was bitten nearly to the quick. I looked at Maxim again. He was standing in front of the fireplace. What are you thinking about? I said. My voice was steady and cool. Not like my heart thumping inside me, not like my mind bitter and resentful. He lit a cigarette, surely the 25th that day, and we had only just finished lunch. He threw the match into the empty grate and he picked up the paper. Nothing very much. Why? I don't know. You just look so serious, so far away. He whistled a tune absently, the cigarette twisting in his fingers. As a matter of fact, I was wondering if they had chosen the Surrey side to play the Middlesex or the Oval, he said. He sat down in the chair again and folded the paper. I looked out the window. Presently, Jasper came to me and climbed into my lap. Because dogs are the best. Chapter 13. Maxim had to go up to London at the end of June to some public dinner, a man's house, something to do with the county. He was away for 2 days, and I was left alone. I dreaded his going. When I saw the car disappear around the sweep in the drive, I felt exactly as though it was a final parting and I should never see him again. There would be an accident, of course, and later on in the afternoon, when I came back from my walk, I would find Frith, white and frightened, waiting for me with a message. The doctor would have rung up with some cottage hospital. You must be very brave, he would say. I'm afraid you must be prepared for a great shock. And Frank would come, and we would go to the hospital together. Maxim would not recognize me. I went through the whole thing as I was sitting at lunch. I could see the crowd of local people clustering around the churchyard at the funeral and leaning myself on Frank's arm. It was so real to me that I could scarcely eat my lunch, and I kept straining my ears to hear the telephone should it ring. I sat out in the garden under the chestnut tree in the afternoon with a book in my lap, but I scarcely read at all. When I saw Robert come across the lawn, I knew it was the telephone and felt physically sick. A message from the club, madam, to say Mr. De Winter arrived 10 minutes ago. I shut up my book. Thank you, Robert. How quickly he got up there. Yes, madam, a very good run. Did he ask to speak to me or leave any special message? No, madam, just that he had arrived safely and it was the porter speaking. All right, Robert, thank you very much. The relief was tremendous. I did not feel sick anymore. The pain had gone. It was like coming ashore after a channel crossing. I began to feel rather hungry, and when Robert had gone back into the house, I crept into the dining room through the long window and stole some biscuits from the sideboard. I had 6 of them, Bath Olivers, and then an apple as well. I had no idea it was so empty. I went and ate them all in the woods in case one of the servants should see me on the lawn outside the window, and then go and tell the cook that they did not think Mrs. De Winter cared for the food prepared by the kitchen, as they had just seen her filling herself with fruit and biscuits. The cook would be offended and perhaps go to Mrs. Danvers. Now that Maxim was safe in London, and I had eaten my biscuit, I felt very well and curiously happy. I was aware of a sense of freedom, as though I had no responsibilities at all. It was rather like a Saturday when one was a child. No lessons and no prep. One could do as one liked. One put on an old skirt and a pair of sand shoes and played hare and hounds in the common with the children who lived next door. I had just the same feeling. And I had not felt like this the whole time I had been at Manderley. It must be because Maxim had gone to London. And I was rather shocked at myself. I could not understand it at all. I had not wanted him to go. And now, this lightness of heart, this spring in my step, this childish feeling that I wanted to run across the lawn and troll down to the bank. I wiped the biscuit crumbs from my mouth and called to Jasper. Perhaps I was just feeling like this because it was a very lovely day. We went through the happy valley to the little cove. The azaleas were finished now. The petals lay brown and crinkled on the moss. The bluebells had not faded yet. They made a solid carpet in the woods above the valley, and the young bracket was shooting up, curling and green. The moss smelt rich and deep, and the bluebells were earthy and bitter. I lay down on the long grass beside the bluebells with my hands behind my head and Jasper at my side. He looked down at me, panting, his face foolish, the saliva dripping from his tongue and his heavy jowl. There were pigeons somewhere in the trees above. It was very peaceful and quiet. I wondered why it was that places are so much lovelier when one is alone. How commonplace and stupid it would be if I had a friend now sitting beside me, someone I had known at school who would say, "By the way, I saw old Hilda the other day. You remember her, the one who was good at tennis? She's married with 2 children." And the bluebells beside us, unnoticed, and the pigeons overhead, unheard. I did not want anyone with me, not even Maxim. If Maxim had been there, I should not be lying in the grass as I was now, chewing on a piece of grass, my eyes shut. I would have been watching him, watching his eyes, his expression, wondering if he liked it, if he was bored, wondering what he was thinking. But now I could relax. None of those things mattered. Maxim was in London. Hi, baby girl. How lovely it was to be alone again. Well, no, I did not mean that. It was disloyal, wicked. That's not what I meant. Maxim was my life and my world. I got up from the bluebells and called sharply to Jasper. We set off together down the valley to the beach. The tide was out, the sea very calm and remote. It looked like a great placid lake out in the bay. I cannot imagine it rough now any more than I can imagine winter in summer. There was no wind, and the sun shone on the lapping water where it ran into the little pools in the rocks. Jasper scrambled up the rocks immediately, glancing back my way, one ear blown back against his head, giving him an odd rakish appearance. "Not that way, Jasper," I said. He cared nothing for me, of course. He loped off, deliberately disobedience. "What a nuisance he is," I said aloud, and I scrambled up the rocks after him, pretending to myself I did not want to go to the other beach. Oh well, I thought, it can't be helped. After all, Maxim is not with me. It's got nothing to do with me. I splashed through the pools on the rocks, humming a tune. The cove looked different when the tide was out, less formidable. There was only about 3 feet of water in the tiny harbor. A boat would just float there comfortably, I supposed, at dead low water. The buoy was still there. It was painted white and green. I had not noticed that before. Perhaps it had been raining and the color was indistinct. There was no one on the beach. I walked across the shingles to the other side of the one ahead, as though it was, and climbed into the low stone wall of the jetty arm. Jasper ran on ahead as though it was his custom. There was a ring on the wall and an iron ladder descending to the water. That's where the dinghy would be tied, I supposed, and one would climb to it from the ladder. The buoy was just opposite, about 30 feet away. There was something written on it. I craned my neck sideways to read the lettering. Je reviens. What a funny name. Like a boat. Perhaps it had been a French boat, though, a fishing boat. Fishing boats sometimes had names like that. Happy return, I'm here, those sort of names. Je reviens. I come back? Yes, I suppose it was a good name for a boat. Only it had not been right for that particular boat, which would never come back again. It must be cold sailing out there in the bay, beyond the beacon, away onto the headland. The sea was calm on the bay, but even today, even when they were so still, out there around the headland, there was a ripple of white foam on the surface of the water where the tide was racing. A small boat would heel to the wind when she rounded the headland and come out of the landlocked bay. The sea would splash inboard, perhaps, run down the deck. The person at the tiller would wipe the spray out of her eyes and hair, glance up at the streaming mast. I wonder what color the boat had been. Green and white, perhaps, like the buoy. Not very big, Frank had said, with a little cabin. Jasper was sniffing at the iron ladder. "Come away," I said. "I don't want to go in after you." I went back along the harbor wall to the beach. The cottage did not seem so remote and sinister at the edge of the wood as it had done before. The sun made such a difference. No rain today, pattering on the roof. I walked slowly up the beach towards it. After all, it was only a cottage, nobody living in it. There's nothing to be frightened of. Nothing at all. Any place seemed damp and sinister when it had been uninhabited for a certain time. Even new bungalows and places. Besides, there had been moonlight picnics and things here. Weekend visitors probably used to come and bathe and then go in for a sail on the boat. I stood looking at the neglected garden choked with nettles. Someone ought to come and tidy it up. One of the gardeners. There's no need to leave it like this. I pushed the little gate and went to the door of the cottage. It was not entirely closed. I was certain I had closed it the last time. Jasper began growling, sniffing under the door. Don't, Jasper, I said. He went on sniffing deeply, his nose thrust to the lintel. I pushed the door open and looked inside. It was very dark, like it had been before. Nothing had changed. The cobwebs still hung to the rigging in the model boats. The door in the boat store at the end of the room was open, though. Jasper growled again, and there was a sound of something falling. Jasper barked furiously, and darting between my legs into the room, he tore open the door of the store. I followed him, heart beating, and then stood uncertainly in the middle of the room. Jasper, come back! Don't be a fool! I said. He stood in the doorway, still barking furiously, an hysterical note in his voice. Something was there, then, inside the store. Not a rat. He would have gone for a rat. Jasper, come here, I said. He would not come, and I went slowly to the door of the store. Is anybody there? No one answered. I bent down to Jasper, putting my hand on his collar, and looked around the edge of the door. Someone was sitting in the corner against the wall. Someone who, from his crouched position, was even more frightened than I. It was Ben. He was trying to hide behind one of the sails. What is the matter? Do you want something? I said. He blinked at me stupidly, his mouth slightly open. I'm not doing anything. Quiet, Jasper, I scolded, putting my hand over his muzzle. I took a belt off it and ran through his collar as a leash. What do you want, Ben? I said, a little bolder this time. He did not answer. He watched me with his sly eyes. I think you had better come out. Mr. De Winter doesn't like people walking in and out of here. He shambled to his feet, grinning furtively, wiping his nose with the back of his hand. The other hand he kept behind his back. What have you got, Ben? I said. He obeyed me like a child, showing me the other hand. There was a fishing line in it. I'm not doing nothing, he repeated. Does that line belong here? I asked. Listen, Ben. You can take that line if you want to, but you mustn't do it again. It's not honest taking people's things. He said nothing. He blinked at me and wriggled. Come along, I said firmly. I went to the main room and he followed me. Jasper had stopped barking, and there was now sniffing at Ben's heels. I did not want to stop any longer in the cottage. I walked quickly out into the sunshine, Ben shuffling behind me. Then I shut the door. You had better go home, I said to Ben. He held his fishing line, clutched his heart like a treasure. You won't put me in the asylum, will you? He said. I saw then he was trembling with fright. His hands were shaking, and his eyes were fixed on mine in supplication like a dumb thing. Of course not, I said gently. I done nothing, he repeated. I never told no one. I don't want to be put in that asylum. A tear rolled down his dirty face. That's all right, Ben, I said. No one will put you away, but you must not go in the cottage again. I turned away, and he came after me, pawing at my hand. Here, he said. Here, I got something for you. He smiled foolishly. He beckoned with his finger and turned towards the beach. I went with him, and he bent down and picked up a flat stone by a rock. There was a little heap of shells under the stone. He chose one and presented it to me. That's yourn, he said. Thank you, it's very pretty, I said. He grinned again, rubbing his ear, his fright forgotten. You've got angel's eyes, he said. I glanced down at the shell again, rather taken aback. I did not know what to say. You're not like the other one, he said. Who do you mean? I said. What other one? He shook his head. His eyes were sly again. He laid his finger against his nose. Tall and dark she was, he said. She gave you the feeling of a snake. I seen her here with me own eyes. By night she'd come. I seen her. He paused, watching me intently, and I did not say anything. I looked in on her once, he said, and she turned on me and said, You don't know me, do you? She said. You've never seen me here, and you won't again. If I catch you looking at me through those windows here, I'll have you put in the asylum, she said. You wouldn't like that, would you? They're cruel to people in the asylum, she said. I won't say anything, ma'am, I said. And I touched me cap like this here. He pulled on his sweater. She gone now, ain't she? He said anxiously. I don't know who you mean, I said slowly. No one is going to put you in the asylum. Good afternoon, Ben. I turned away and walked up the beach to the path, dragging Jasper by his belt. Poor wretch, he was potty, of course. He did not know what he was talking about. It was hardly like anyone would have threatened him with an asylum. Maxim had said he was quite harmless, and so had Frank. Yes, that's exactly what I was thinking. Finally, someone who doesn't think Rebecca hung the moon. Yes. Maxim had said he was quite harmless, and so did Frank. Perhaps he had heard himself discussed once amongst his own people, and the memory of it lingered like an ugly picture in the mind of a child. He would have a child's mentality, too, regarding likes and dislikes. He would take a fancy to a person for no reason and be friendly one day, perhaps, and sullen the next. He had been friendly with me because I had said he could keep the fishing line. Tomorrow, if I met him, he might not know me. It was absurd to notice anything said by an idiot. I glanced back over my shoulder at the cove. The tide had begun to turn and was swirling slowly around the arm of the arbor wall. Ben had disappeared over the rocks. The beach was deserted again. I could just see the stone chimney of the cottage through a gap in the dark trees. I had a sudden, unaccountable desire to run. I pulled at Jasper's leash and panted up the steep, narrow path through the woods, not looking back anymore. Had I been offered all the treasure in the world, I would not have turned and gone down to the cottage or to that beach again. It was as though someone waited down there in the little garden where the nettles grew. Someone who watched and listened. Jasper barked as he ran together. He thought it was some new kind of game. He kept trying to bite the belt and worry it. I had not realized how closely the trees grew together here. Their roots stretched across the path like tendrils ready to trip one. They ought to clear all this, I thought as I ran, catching my breath. Maxim should get the men to do it. There was no sense or beauty in this undergrowth. That tangle of shrubs there should be cut down to bring light into the path. It was dark, much too dark. That naked eucalyptus tree, stifled by branches, looked like a white beached limb of a skeleton, and there was a black, earthy stream running behind it. It choked with the muddled grains of years trickling silently to the beach below. The birds did not sing here, as they did in the valley. It was quiet in a different way, and even as I ran and panted up the path, I could hear the wash of the sea. The tide creep into the cove. I understood why Maxim disliked the path and the cove. I disliked them too. I had been a fool to come this way. I should have stayed on the other beach, on the white shingle, and come home by the happy valley. I was glad to come out into the lawn and see the house where, in the hollow, stood solid and secure. The woods were behind me. I would ask Robert to bring me my tea under the chestnut tree. I glanced at my watch. It was earlier than I thought, not yet 4. I'd have to wait a bit. It was not the routine at Manderley to have tea before past. I was glad Frith was out. Robert would not make such a performance of bringing the tea out to the garden. As I wandered across the lawn to the terrace, my eye was caught by a gleam of sunshine on something metal showing through the green and the rhododendron leaves at the turn of the drive. I shaded my eyes with my hand to see what it was. It looked like the radiator of a car. I wondered if someone had called. If they had, though, they would have driven up to the house, not left their car concealed like that from the house at the turn of the drive by the shrubs. I went a little closer. Yes, it was a car, all right. I could see the wings now and the hood. What a funny thing. Visitors never did that as a rule, and the tradesmen went around the back by way of the old stables and the garage. It was not Frank's Morris, I knew that well. This was a long, low car, a sports car. I wonder what I had better do. If it was a caller, Robert would have shown them into the library or the drawing room. In the drawing room, they would be able to see me as I came across the lawn. I did not want to face a caller dressed like this. I should have to ask them to stay to tea. I hesitated at the end of the lawn. For no reason, perhaps because the sunlight flickered a moment from the glass, I looked up at the house, and as I did so, I noticed with surprise that the shutters of one of the windows in the west wing had been opened up. Someone stood by the window, a man. And then he must have caught sight of me because he drew back abruptly, and a figure behind him put up an arm and closed the shutters. The arm belonged to Mrs. Danvers. I recognized the black sleeve. Wondered for a minute if it was a public day and she was showing the rooms. Well, it could not be, though, because Frith always did that, and Frith was out. Besides, the rooms on the west wing were not shown to the public. I had not been able to see them myself. No, I knew it was not a public day. The public never came on a Tuesday. Perhaps it was something to do with a repair in one of the rooms. It was odd, though, the way the man had been looking out, and directly he saw me, he whipped back into the room and the shutters were closed. And the car, too, drawn up beside the rhododendron so that it would not be seen from the house. Still, that was up to Mrs. Danvers. It was nothing to do with me. She had friends she took to the West Wing. It was not exactly my affair. I had never known it to happen before, though. Odd that it should occur on this only day Maxim was from home. I strolled rather somewhat self-consciously across the lawn to the house, aware that they might be watching me still from a chink in the shutters. I went up the steps and through the big front door to the hall. There was no sign of a strange cap or stick, and no card on the silver. Evidently, this was not an official visitor. Well, it was not my affair. I went into the flower room and washed my hands in the basin to save going upstairs. It would be awkward if I met them face to face on the stairs or somewhere. I remembered I had left my knitting in the morning room before lunch, and I went along through the drawing room to fetch it, the faithful Jasper at my heels. The morning room door was open, and I noticed my bag of knitting had been moved. I had left it on the divan, and it had been picked up and pushed behind a cushion. There was the imprint of a person on the fabric, or the divan where my knitting had been. Someone had sat down recently and picked up my knitting because it had been in the way. The chair by the desk had also been moved. It looked as though Mrs. Danvers entertained her guest in the morning room when Maxim and I were out of the way. I felt rather uncomfortable. I would rather not know. Jasper was sniffing around the divan and wagging his tail. He was not suspicious of the visitor anyway. I took my bag of knitting and went out. As I did so, the door of the large drawing room that led to the stone passage and the back premises opened, and I heard voices. I darted back into the morning room again, just in time. I had not been seen. I waited behind the door, frowned at Jasper, who stood in the doorway looking at me, his tongue hanging out, wagging his tail. The little wretch would give me away. I stood very still, holding my breath. Then I heard Mrs. Danvers speak. "I expect she's gone to the library," she said. "She's come home early for some reason. If she's gone to the library, you will be able to get through the hall without her seeing you. Wait here while I go and see." I knew they were talking about me. I began to feel more uncomfortable than ever. It was so furtive, this whole business, and I did not want to catch Mrs. Danvers in the wrong. Then Jasper turned his head sharply towards the drawing room. He trotted out, wagging his tail. "Hello, little tyke," I heard the man say. Jasper began to bark excitedly. I looked around desperately for somewhere to hide. Hopeless, of course. And then I heard a footstep quite close to my ear, and the man came into the room. He did not see me at first because I was behind the door, but Jasper made a dive at me, still barking with delight. The man wheeled around suddenly and saw me. I have never seen anyone look more astonished. I might have been the burglar, and he a master of the house. "I beg your pardon," he said, looking me up and down. He was a big, hefty fellow, good-looking in a rather flashy, sunburnt way. He had the hot, blue eyes usually associated with heavy drinking and loose living. His hair was reddish like the skin. In a few years, he would run to fat, his neck bulging over the back of his collar. His mouth gave him away. It was too soft, too pink. I could smell the whiskey on his breath from where I stood, and he began to smile. The sort of smile he would give to every woman. "I hope I haven't startled you," he said. I came out from behind the door, looking no doubt as big a fool as I felt. "No, of course not. I heard voices. I was not quite sure who it was. I did not expect any callers this afternoon." "What a shame," he said heartily. "It's too bad of me to butt in on you like this. I hope you'll forgive me. The fact is, I just popped in to see old Danny. She's a very good friend of mine." "Oh, of course. It's quite all right," I said. "Dear old Danny," he said. "She's so anxious, bless her, not to disturb anyone. She didn't want to worry you." "Oh, doesn't matter at all," I said. was watching Jasper, who was jumping up and pawing at the man in delight. "This little beggar hasn't forgotten me, has he?" he said. "Grown into a jolly little beast. He's quite a youngster when I first saw him. He's too fat, though. He needs more exercise." "I've just taken him for a long walk," I said. "Have you really? Sporting of you," he said. He went on patting Jasper and smiling at me in a familiar way. Then he pulled out his cigarette case. "Have one?" he said. "I don't smoke," I told him. "Don't you really?" He took one for himself and lighted it. I never minded those things, but it seemed odd to me in somebody else's room. Surely rather bad manners, not polite to me. "How's old Max?" he said. I was surprised at his tone. It sounded as though he knew him well. It was queer to hear Maxim talked of as Max. No one called him that. "He's very well, thank you. He's gone up to London." "And left the bride all alone? Well, that's too bad. Isn't he afraid someone will come and carry you off?" He laughed, opening his mouth, and I did not like his laugh. There was something offensive about it. I did not like him either. Just then, Mrs. Danvers came into the room. She turned her eyes upon me, and I felt quite cold. Oh, God, I thought, how she must hate me. "Hello, Danny, there you are," said the man. "All your precautions were in vain. The mistress of the house was hiding behind the door." And he laughed again. Mrs. Danvers did not say anything. She just went on looking at me. "Well, aren't you going to introduce me? After all, it's the usual thing to do, isn't it, to pay one's respects to the bride?" "This is Mr. Favell." Favell? "This is Mr. Favell." That sounds a little like Feifel. I'm going to say Favell. "This is Mr. Favell, madam," said Mrs. Danvers. She spoke quietly, rather unwillingly. I don't think she wanted to introduce him to me. "How do you do?" I said. And then, with an effort to be polite, "Won't you stay for tea?" He looked very amused, and he turned to Mrs. Danvers. "Now, isn't that a charming invitation? I've been asked to stay to tea. By heaven, Danny, I have a good mind to." I saw a flash look of warning at him. I felt very uneasy. It was all wrong, this situation, and not ought to be happening at all. "Well, perhaps you're right," he said. "It would be a lot of fun, all the same. I suppose I'd better be going, hadn't I? Come and have a look at my car." He still spoke in a familiar, rather offensive way. I did not want to go look at his car. I felt very awkward and embarrassed. "Come on," he said. "It's a jolly good little car, much faster than anything poor old Max ever has." I could not think of an excuse. The whole business was so forced and stupid, and I did not like it. And why did Mrs. Danvers have to stand there looking at me with that smoldering look in her eyes? "Where is the car?" I said feebly. "Round the bend on the drive. I don't drive up to the door. I was afraid of disturbing you. I had some idea you possibly resting in the afternoon." I said nothing. The lie was too obvious. We all walked out through the drawing room and out into the hall. I saw him glance over his shoulder and wink at Mrs. Danvers. She did not wink in return. I hardly expected she would. She looked very hard and grim. Jasper frolicked out into the drive. He seemed delighted with the sudden appearance of this visitor, who he apparently appeared to know so well. "I left my cap in the car, I believe. As a matter of fact, I didn't come this way." I slipped around and bearded Danny in her den. "Coming over to see the car, too?" He looked inquiringly at Mrs. Danvers. Hesitated, watching me out of her eye. "No," she said. "No, I don't think I'll come out now. Goodbye, Mr. Jack." He seized her hand and shook it heartily. "Goodbye, Danny. Take care of yourself. You know where to get in touch with me always. It's done me a power of good to see you again." He walked out onto the drive, Jasper dancing at his heels, and I followed him slowly, feeling very uncomfortable still. "Dear old Manderley," he said, looking up at the windows. "Place hasn't changed much. I suppose Danny sees to that. What a powerful woman she is, eh?" "Yes, she's very efficient," I said. "What do you think of it all? Like being buried down here?" "I am very fond of Manderley," I said stiffly. "Weren't you living somewhere in the south of France when Max met you? Monte, wasn't it? I used to know Monte well." "Yes, I was in Monte Carlo," I said. We had come to his car now, a green sports thing typical of his owner. "What do you think of it?" "Very nice," I said politely. "Come for a run in the lodge gates?" he said. "No, I don't think I will. I'm rather tired." "You don't think it would look too good for the mistress of Manderley to be seen driving with someone like me, is that it?" he said, and he laughed, shaking his head at me. No, no, I said, turning rather red. No, really. He went on, looking me up and down, like an amused way with those familiar, unpleasant blue eyes. I felt like a barmaid. Oh, well, we mustn't let the bride astray, must we, Jasper? It wouldn't do at all. He reached for his cap and an enormous pair of motoring gloves. He threw his cigarette away on the drive. Goodbye. It's been a lot of fun meeting you. Goodbye, I said. By the way, he said carelessly, it would be very sporting and grand of you if you did not mention this little visit of mine to Max. He doesn't exactly approve of me, I'm afraid, and I don't know why, and it might get poor old Danny into trouble. No, I said awkwardly. No, all right. That's very sporting of you. Sure you won't change your mind and come for a run? No, I don't think I will, if you don't mind. Bye-bye, then. Perhaps I'll come and look you up one day. Get down, Jasper, you devil. You'll scratch my paint. I say, I'll call it a damn shame Max is going to London and leave you alone like this. I don't mind. I like being alone, I said. Do you, by Jove? What an extraordinary thing. It's all wrong, you know, against nature. How long have you been married? 3 months, is it? About that, I said. I say, I wish I had got a bride of 3 months waiting for me at home. I'm a poor, lonesome bachelor. He laughed again and pulled his cap down over his eyes. Very well, he said, starting up the engine, and the car shot down the drive, snorting explosive fury from the exhaust, while Jasper stood looking after him, his ears drooping, his tail between his legs. Oh, come on, Jasper, I said. Don't be so idiotic. I walked slowly back to the house. Mrs. Danvers had disappeared. I stood in the hall and rang the bell. Nothing happened for about 5 minutes. I rang. Presently, Alice appeared, her face rather aggrieved. Yes, madam, she said. Oh, Alice, isn't Robert there? I rather fancied my tea out under the chestnut tree. Robert went out to the post this afternoon and isn't back yet, madam, said Alice. Mrs. Danvers gave him to understand you would be late for tea. Frith is out too, of course. If you want your tea now, I can get it for you. I don't think it's quite 4:30 yet. Oh, it doesn't matter, Alice. I'll wait till Robert comes back, I said. I supposed when Maxim was away, things automatically became slack. I'd never known Frith and Robert to be out at the same time. It was Frith's day, of course. Mrs. Danvers had sent Robert to the post, and I myself was understood to have gone for a long walk. That man, Favell, had chosen his time well to play his call on Mrs. Danvers. It was almost too well chosen. There was something not right about it, I was certain of that. And then he had asked me not to say anything to Maxim. It was all very awkward. I did not want to get Mrs. Danvers into trouble or make any sort of scene. And more important, I still did not want to worry Maxim. I wondered who he was, this man Favell. He had called Maxim Max. No one ever called him Max. I had seen it written once on the flyleaf of a book, the letters thin and slanting, curiously appointed, the tail of the M very definite, very long. I thought there was only one person who had ever called him Max. As I stood there in the hall, undecided about my tea, wondering what to do, the thought suddenly came to me that perhaps Mrs. Danvers was dishonest, and all this time she was engaged in some business behind Maxim's back. And coming back as early as I had today, I had discovered her and this man, an accomplice, who had then bluffed his way out by pretending to be familiar with the house and with Maxim. I wondered what they had been doing in the West Wing. Why had they closed the shutters when they saw me on the lawn? It was filled with vague disquiet. Frith and Robert had been away. The maids were generally in their bedrooms, changing during the afternoon. Mrs. Danvers would have had the run of the place. Suppose this man was a thief, and Mrs. Danvers was on his pay. There were valuable things in the West Wing. I had a sudden, rather terrifying impulse to creep upstairs now to the West Wing and go into those rooms and see for myself. Robert was not back yet. I would have just enough time before tea. I hesitated, glancing at the gallery. The house seemed very still and quiet. The servants were all in their own quarters beyond the kitchen. Jasper lapped noisily at his drinking bowl below the stairs, the sound echoing to the great stone hall. I began to walk upstairs. My heart was beating in a queer, excited way. Bum, bum, bum. So I'm not going to start the next chapter because they're like half hour long. But next time we will find what is in the West Wing. Hopefully. Yeah. Fantastic. So we are up to chapter 14. I hope you guys enjoyed. I did. I need to know who this man is. I need to know what they're doing. All of the things. But I guess I'll have to wait 48 hours because I'm not reading ahead. Thank you so much for joining me, and I will see you next time on Thursday. Have a really, really good day, you guys. See you later.